8th grade. It's the last video for To Kill a Mockingbird, so I'll go through the last couple chapters and then I'll talk about the test. Okay? So 29 starts off with them learning about Bobby Will being dead. Okay? And it goes back to Bobby Will threatening Atticus and that he would get him if it was the last thing he did. And it was the last thing he did, or he tried to get Atticus back. So, as far as Atticus is concerned, um, he, of course, you could say it talks about him going gray and he's so overwhelmed and worried. And you can tell, like, this isn't what he thought Bobby Wool would do. Okay? So Aunt Alexandra wants to go out into the living room, get out of there where Jim is. And you find out why is because she looks at Atticus and she says, "This is all my fault." She feels totally responsible. "I should have gone with him. I had a feeling about tonight. I should have gone." And of course, there was no way for her to know. So and Alexandra leaves, and they stay in the room to hear Scout's side of the story. Okay, so she talks about Cecil Jacobs. They thought it was him because he scared him earlier. And as far as when they're walking, of course, it talks about that she's in her costume and that Jim could see her because of the shiny paint that's on there. And they talk about the construction of her costume. And Mr. Tate, once he figures out that it was made of chicken wire and she was basically in a cocoon, um, he realizes that it matches the perforations in his sleeve and he has corresponding marks on his arm. And he gets the costume that they took off of Scout and he examines it and then he sees the clean line that's in there. So if you think back to the scene where she's attacked, the first sound she hears when she's grabbed is a metal on metal sound. So you realize the sound that she's hearing is Bobby Ewell trying to stab her, and the only reason the blade didn't hit her is because of the chicken wire that's around her. And of course, Mr. Tate says Bob Ewell meant business, and Atticus says he was out of his mind. And Sheriff Tate was like, "No, he wasn't. He's low down, mean, and drunk." And of course, Atticus always thought he would take it out on him, but somebody like Bob Ewell that's going to blame Tom Robinson for Mayella, um, walk after Helen Robinson and be mean to her, try to get into Judge Taylor's house when he thought he wasn't home. Like, he's not going to face you, come face to face with you and attack you. He's going to be low down and sneaky, just like Aunt Alexandra said at the beginning. So they get under the tree, and then for her, she tries to tell the story from, remember, she's in her costume, she can't really see anything. So it's really what she thinks happened and what she heard. So she heard the bamming and the tussling under the trunk, and they go through there and the funny noise, and then she realizes what that was. And then she talks about Bobby Ewell squeezing her and that somebody yanked Bobby Ewell, off of her, and that for her, she just thought it was Jim. And at this point, it says, so she talks about somebody staggering, and she realized there was a fourth person there, and she thought it was Atticus, but she realizes it was someone else, and then she notices the man, or addresses the man that she didn't know who he was against the wall. And so she points at him, and then immediately he kind of, shoves himself back into the wall and places his hands on the wall. And then it describes him to you as sickly white. He has a shadow on his chin from just facial hair, but everything else is so white. His cheeks almost look hollow. He has indentations at his temples. He has like stained pants, a torn shirt, and he hardly has any hair. And it says his eyes are almost gray, like there's almost no color, that you almost think he's blind, which means he hasn't been in the sun in a really long time. And then as she's observing him, of course, she realizes who it is, and she says, "Hey, Boo." And then, of course, Atticus corrects her and says it's Mr. Arthur. And as far as everybody else, none of them even remotely care that he's there. Like, Atticus is bland about it. Dr. Reynolds walks in and just says, "Hey, Arthur, didn't see you there." And Sheriff Tate doesn't say anything. And Alexandra hasn't said anything about it. Um, and so Dr. Reynolds walks in, and of course, Scout's just enthralled, like, this is really happening. I'm meeting him. And so Dr. Reynolds walks in and kicks them out. So they decide to go into the front porch instead of where they have all the lights in the living room. And Scout eventually realizes why that is, because Boo Radley is more comfortable in the dark. So they walk outside. Scout leads him through their house. And for her, it's like, it's finally happening. He's really here. I can talk to him, right? Pretty spell we're having. And at this point, you have a conversation between Heck and Atticus trying to figure out what they're going to do and what actually happened. So for Atticus, he's like trying to figure out, he's like, how old is Jim? He's nearly 13. Think back to the beginning of the book. We're back there. That's the first line in the book. Jim was nearly 13. So for him, it's clear cut self defense. It's going to go to trial. And for Sheriff Tate, he's like, no, there's no way your son killed Bobby Ewell. Okay. So that's what they're going back and forth. Okay. So for Atticus, Scout said Jim pulled Bobby Ewell off of him. So it had to be Jim. And for Sheriff Tate, he's like, you want to tell me your 12-year-old son who has a broken arm pulled a grown man off of Scout and took him down? There's no way. Okay. So they're going back and forth. And for Atticus, whatever, I mean, he looks at Scout and says, so you said that Jim yanked Bobby Ewell off of you? And she goes, yeah, I think so. And for Atticus, he's like, there you go. She said it, so that's how it happened. And for him, it's all about making sure the truth is told. And so he doesn't want Jim going into life and saying his father got him off because of who he is. Okay. And for Sheriff Tate, he's like, Mr. Finch, Bobby Ewell fell on his knife and he killed himself. That's what happened. And for Atticus and Heck, they're both standing on the porch and they're digging their heels in. And they're two extremely stubborn men when they're doing something they feel is right or they know is right. And that's what you're seeing them both dig their heels in about. So for Atticus, remember, he goes through here and he says, before Jim looks at anyone, he looks at me, and I try to live so I can look squarely back at him. The idea of being truthful always and acting the same inside the house and outside the house, saying the same things inside the house and outside the house, and having his kids trust him implicitly is what he feels like he has to always achieve. Like he has to be truthful with them and always represent the truth because he wants his children always to trust him and always to come to him if they have any questions. So for him, whatever Scout says is the truth, and that's how they're going to play him. So Mr. Tate's like, nope. He flung Jim down, stumbled over a root. Remember, they're under the tree, and he fell on his knife. Like, that's what Sheriff Tate says. And as far as Sheriff Tate, as they're kind of having this conversation, Dr. Reynolds leaves, and Mr. Tate takes a knife out of his pocket, and he kind of demonstrates to Atticus what happened. Okay, and he tells Atticus, Scout's 8 years old. It was dark. She was too scared to know exactly what went on. Okay, and of course, Atticus says you'd be surprised what she understands, which is true. And he said, and I'm not saying she's lying, but I'm saying it was too dark. There was too much going on. She was too scared to know exactly what happened. And of course, Atticus is like, I'm not having this where I won't have it. Like he's going to go off of Jim did it trial, self-defense. And then this is where Mr. Tate loses his temper a little bit. He's like, I'm not thinking of your son. And then as you keep reading, you realize who he's thinking of, and it's Arthur Radley. Okay, so um, you have this little section because when he stamps his foot, lights go on because that kind of loud noise in the middle of the night wake people up. So He says, I'm sorry to fight with you like this. This is Sheriff Tate. He says, but for once you haven't been able to put this case together. I mean, you just witnessed him with Tom Robinson and all those nooks and crannies that he brought out that were true. But for this one, he's like, you are missing it. Okay? He says, we have got to figure this out because Bobby Ewell is dead and morning's coming and everybody's gonna know about it. So, um, Mr. Tate goes on and says, there's no way a boy of Jim's size could have, with a broken arm, could tackle Bobby. Will pull him off of Scout and kill him. There's no way. And then all of a sudden, because Atticus's mind is reeling, he goes, heck, where'd you get that switchblade knife? And Mr. Tate answers, I took it off a drunk man. Who was the drunk man earlier? Bob Ewell. Because remember, Sheriff Tate went out there to investigate first. And of course, Scout's sitting there trying to figure it out. She's going back through it. And after Mr. Tate answers, took it off a drunk man, Atticus goes, heck, like, where'd you get it from? And all he will say to him is, I took it off a drunk man, which is technically true. He's telling him the truth, okay? And this is where Atticus is starting to put two and two together. It wasn't his son who stabbed him. It was Bill Radley, okay? So think about it. The kids are walking. You have Bobby Ewell coming after him. He attacks Scout first, and then Jim gets her pulled away. And remember, Boo Radley has, through this whole book, watched out for the kids. And he's one individual that is so used to the dark, he can see what's going on. So, when Jim gets snapped or pulled back, he gets his arm snapped, and then Scout's being squeezed. Here comes Boo Radley, or Arthur Radley, pulls Bobby Ewell off of her and then stabs him. Okay? So at that point, there are two knives at the scene. And then Sheriff Tate, when he goes and he realizes what's happened, he picks up one of the knives and puts it in his pocket. Okay? So, which is technically still not true. And that's what Atticus is having a problem with. And Mr. Tate tells him, it's not your decision, it's mine, it's my responsibility. You can sit there and say Jim did it, and I'm going to call you a liar to your face, okay? And he says, your boy didn't stab Bob Ewell, didn't come near a mile of it, and now you know it. So he knows it wasn't his boy who stabbed Bob Ewell, it was Arthur Radley, okay? And for Mr. Tate, he says, I'm not a very good man, but I am sheriff. He says there's a black boy dead for no reason, Tom Robinson, and the man responsible, Bob Ewell, is dead. Let the let the dead bury the dead this time, Mr. Finch. And then before he leaves, he says one last thing. And he says, I never heard that it's against the law for a citizen, this is Arthur Radley, the citizen, to do his utmost to prevent a crime from being committed, which is exactly what he did. But maybe you'll say it's my duty to tell the town all about it and not hush it up. You know what would happen? All the ladies in Macomb, including my wife, would be knocking on his door bringing angel food cakes. My way of thinking, Mr. Finch, taking the one man who's done you and this town a great service and dragging him with the shy ways into the limelight, to me, that's a sin. It's a sin, and I'm not about to have it on my head. If it was any other man, it'd be different, but not this man, Mr. Finch. So, for Hecate, he's like, I'm not gonna. No one needs to know that Bob Ewell was killed by Arthur Radley, and because just like it says, everybody in the town, when they find out that he saved the kids, would want to go over there and bring him cakes and talk to him and all these different things. And he doesn't want to talk to people. He doesn't want the only reason he came out is because the kids had to have him. He needed to save them. He needed their help, or they needed his help. And for Sheriff Day, he's like, I'm not gonna sit there and put him on display for everyone. He says that's a sin. And so Sheriff Tate leaves, and Atticus, after a minute, looks at Scout because again they're not telling the truth necessarily, and he says, Mr. Ewell fell on his knife. Can you possibly understand that? And then, just like he said before, that she understands much more than people give her credit for. She says, yes, sir, I understand. Mr. Tate was right. And of course, he wants to know what she means by that. And then you have the response, well, it's sort of be like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it? Because it's like Tom Robinson did nothing wrong, okay? And because you have lots of characters that can represent a mockingbird in here. Tom Robinson is one. You have Atticus, who's another, who's done nothing but good things, okay? Um, and then you have in here Arthur Radley. He's done nothing but good and telling the truth in what he did and bringing all that publicity and spotlight on him would be just awful for a man like him. And then, of course, at the end, he, I mean, Atticus thanks Arthur for his children and he walks inside. So, chapter 31 is it. And it says Boo Radley shuffles to his feet and he's kind of uncertain and he coughs a little bit. But Scout's kind of realizing, you know, is kind of getting better at reading him. So she realizes he wants to say goodnight to Jim. So they walk in and he's asleep. And as far as Aunt Alexandra, again, come in, Arthur, like they see him all the time. And Dr. Reynolds is gone, and Alexandra leaves. And then he goes and he's kind of awkward and he doesn't really know what to do, but Scout's like, it's okay, you can pet him and say goodnight. And then you have the one line that Arthur Radley says, and he asks Scout, will you take me home? Okay. And it says he almost whispered it in the voice of a child afraid of the dark. And she's walking and then she pauses and she thinks for a second and she makes Boo Radley kind of hold his arm like this, and then she puts her little hand through his arm, and she does that so if anybody happens to see it, people will look at him and see him escorting her like a gentleman, okay? Because of course at this point all those crazy stories about him, she knew it before, but now she really realizes none of them are true and she wants people to know that. So she walks him down and he goes inside and it says, I never saw him again. And then you have this little section that says, Boo was our neighbor. He gave us, the soap dolls, the watch and chain, pennies, and then it says our lives, but neighbors give in return. We never put back into the tree what we took out of it. We had given him nothing, and it made me sad. And in that moment, she kind of pauses and she turns around, and that little saying from the beginning with Miss Caroline, where Atticus tells her to step into somebody's shoes to kind of learn more about him. And as she turns around, she kind of realizes his view from his window. Like, this is all he sees because he doesn't go outside. And he can see their entire street. Like, this street is his whole world. That's it. That's all he knows. And it says, in the daylight, I thought you could see to the post office corner. And then you have this section that literally goes and summarizes your entire book. It says daylight, but Stephanie Crawford going over to talk to Miss Rachel. Two children scamper down toward the sidewalk toward a man approaching, and they race to him, which is Atticus. It was summertime. The children came closer because they're all trying to figure out and get a note to him. This is with Dill, and they play the game. And then it says it was fall, and the children fought on the sidewalk in front of Miss Dubos's. Remember that? And winter, and the children shivered at his gate with the Miss Maudie's house on fire. Winter, and a man shoots a dog. And then it says summer, and he watched his children's heartbreak, which is the Tom Robinson case. And then it says it was autumn again, and Boo's children needed him, which is when he goes and he saves them. And it says Atticus was right. One time he said, you never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough. So she kind of realizes, like, he literally experienced all of that with them, and he watched out for them all of the time. So she's kind of walking home. The rain is falling, and she feels very old, and she doesn't have much left to learn except for algebra. She knows it all now. As she's walking home with her eyes crossed like this, she's very old and mature, right? She knows everything. That's what she thinks. And so she goes home, and she sees that Atticus is sitting there with Jim, and he tries to get her to go to sleep, but she doesn't want to. So she gets in his lap and he's reading the Gray Ghost. And she says, read it aloud. It's real scary. And Atticus is like, maybe you shouldn't have scary right now. And she goes, oh, I wasn't scared and nothing's really that scary unless it's in books. And Atticus is like, he just dismisses it. So he reads, and of course, she's falling asleep. And so he's carrying her. It's kind of like we've all done. Like, I'm not asleep. I heard it all. I heard all of it. I was just resting my eyes. And she talks about the book and how they thought it was the stoner's boy messing up their clubhouse, but they didn't know what he looked like, and they thought he was scary. And then it says, and Atticus, when they finally saw him, why he hadn't done any of those things. And so at first she's talking about the book, but in the end she's talking about Arthur Radley, and he hadn't done any of those things. And Atticus, he was really nice. And of course, he says most people are scout when you finally see them or meet them or get to know them. And then, of course, that's where our book ends. Okay, so your test has 3 sections. Okay, your first section is all about your characters, it's a matching section. So make sure you feel comfortable describing your characters. And then for those characters that have real names and then nicknames, make sure you know those. Okay, but it's all characters matching with their descriptions. The next one is a true false section, and so it goes through the plot of your story from beginning to getting in a fight with Walter Cunningham, etc. The setting of the story to the end with Bobby Wool. Okay, so as far as the true false, it's not going to sit there and nitpick like um, Atticus had chicken for breakfast after the Tom Robinson trial. It's not going to do that. It's going to go over major parts of the plot. So remember, when you take the test, true, false, if any one part of the statement is untrue, the whole thing is false. Okay? So remember, you have your summaries you can read back through. You can look back through my videos. There are short summaries you can read online to go back through the book. And then the last little section is a little short answer, which will be some bonus questions. Okay, so I'll say this about the short answer bonus questions. They are all addressed in my videos. Okay, so if you've been watching them, then you've heard me talk about it. Okay, and even if you haven't watched all the videos, if you've read the book, they're questions that you can make a pretty decent guess at. They're meant to help your average. So if you have like, in all honesty, this test is know your characters, know the major parts of the plot, and if you've read it and you know those things, it's meant to help out your test average. Okay. So if you have any questions for me, text me, email me. You could call my cell phone. I'll be happy to answer them. And the test will be Friday.